Imagine you are scrolling through photos of an empty house on Zillow. Or maybe you're looking at like the preliminary rendering of a new civic center.
Oh yeah, those pristine digital mock-ups,
Right, and the spaces, they just look like these monumental abstract video game levels.
completely devoid of life.
Exactly. It is just intersecting planes of drywall, glass, and steel. And, the geometry might be impressive, but you have almost zero concept of the actual spatial reality. It feels vague, almost sterile, I mean.
Because there's no context for the human body.
Yes, and that is exactly what we are getting into today. And we are going to explore this radical but incredibly simple idea, which is that architecture is never just the design of static objects or building envelopes. The empty room is, well, it's actually an architectural lie.
It really is a lie.
Yeah.
Sitting here, looking at this virtual drafting studio backdrop we've got going on with these massive blueprints, the text makes the argument that a building is never truly complete until it is understood entirely in relation to the living body. Until you introduce the flesh, the blood, the movement, and the rest into the drawing, you are merely organizing geometry.
For anyone listening who loves figuring out the underlying mechanics of the world, like why certain places make you feel anxious and others make you want to linger for hours, this text fundamentally changes how you view every single room you walk into. It shifts the focus from the bricks and mortar to the invisible tension between the environment and your own physical presence.
And that tension begins with a concept we often we just take for granted when analyzing a space.
Yeah.
The distinction between objective size and relational scale.
Oh, this part was fascinating. Can you break that down?
Sure. So in a pure data sense, a room might be 10 meters long with a 4-meter ceiling. That objective measurement is size.
Okay, just raw data.
Right. But scale is the experiential friction between those dimensions and the human body. An architect can draft a 4-meter ceiling, but what actually matters architecturally is the psychological and physical weight of that height when a person is standing underneath it.
Because we only understand the built environment through bodily comparison, right?
Exactly. We measure everything against ourselves.
The text points out that we recognize a door's significance by subconsciously comparing its frame to our own shoulders walking through it.
Yeah, or we read a windowsill by where it intersects our eye level.
Oh, right. And a stair riser only makes geometric sense because our brains possess this ingrained expectation of a human footstep.
Which means the human body isn't just, an object an architect drops into a drawing for flavor. It operates as a proportional key.
A proportional key. I love that phrase.
It's crucial. Throughout history, long before we had digitized CAD software, proportion systems across various cultures were explicitly tied to anatomy, movement, physical reach, all of it.
Like Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man kind of stuff.
Exactly like that. Counter heights, the width of a hallway, the slope of a ramp, they are all painstakingly calibrated against the mechanics of human physiology.
So without the body, the math is just meaningless.
Pretty much. When a designer drafts an empty hall, it might possess this formal elegance, but it remains spatially ambiguous. Introducing the human reference provides the crucial metric not just for height and width, but for comfort, physical pressure, and potential use.
It is the ultimate reality check.
It really is.
But a body isn't just a static yardstick standing rigidly in the center of a room. This brings up something I found completely fascinating in the source material. The concept of people as spatial actors and the architectural power of posture.
Oh, yes. Posture is huge.
The text is actually quite critical of the tendency to just drag and drop generic human figures into a rendering at the 11th hour merely to give scale.
Because treating figures as decorative afterthoughts entirely misses the point of architectural representation.
Right. It's not just about making the picture look busy.
Exactly. Once the proportional key establishes the size of a space, the next critical step is understanding what that space is actively inviting the occupant to do. And posture delivers that information.
It tells a story.
It does. Think of a rendering of a vast, dimly lit chapel featuring a single stationary figure. That specific posture in that specific volume instantly communicates contemplation, reverence, acoustic quietness.
Yeah, contrast that with a drawing of an open courtyard filled with the scattered kinetic postures of children running.
Totally different vibe.
Right. The architecture hasn't changed, but the behavioral implication is completely different. It communicates openness, play, high energy.
Even just a subtle shift makes a difference. Like a figure leaning heavily against a balcony railing implies a specific edge condition. It's just a sweeping view and a designed place to pause.
Or a figure shown mid-stride climbing a staircase, which expresses exertion and a transition between zones.
And sitting demonstrates permanence, domesticity, or, collective gathering.
I do want to push back on this a bit, though.
Oh, okay, let's hear it.
If posture and human behavior are so critical to communicating the success of a space, why do the people in high-end architectural drawings often look so minimal?
I know what you mean.
Like sometimes they're just ghostly silhouettes or rough gestural scribbles or translucent cutouts. If the goal is to sell the mood and the invitation of the room, shouldn't architects be drafting highly detailed, realistic people to really ground the scene?
What's fascinating here is that injecting hyper-realism into the human figures would actually sabotage the architectural drawing entirely.
Sabotage it? Wait, how does adding detail sabotage the drawing? Wouldn't it make the environment feel more alive?
You would think so, but it distracts the viewer's eye. If you draw a fully realized person with distinct facial features, specific clothing brands, and intricate hair, the image stops being an exploration of the architecture.
Oh, I see. It becomes about the person.
Right. It becomes a character study of that specific individual. The viewer's brain automatically prioritizes the human face over the spatial enclosure.
So we stop looking at the room and start looking at the guy's jacket.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that architectural figures must remain simplified. Gestural outlines, tonal masses, minimal line work. They need to be somewhat anonymous.
They act as an intermediary then. They give you the behavioral cue without stealing the spotlight from the building itself.
Precisely the role they play. The minimal figure is an economic tool.
An economic tool, yeah.
A few well-placed, confident lines can express the tension of leaning or the relaxation of reclining. It tells us everything we need to know about the room's invitation, while allowing the architecture to remain the primary subject of the composition.
That makes a lot of sense. The posture tells us how the space holds a resting body. But bodies moving freely eventually create friction.
They absolutely do.
We don't just stand or sit, we navigate. And here's where it gets really interesting. The text moves from static posture to choreographing movement.
Which introduces the element of time into the architectural drawing.
Time, yes. Reading through the sources, it felt like the architect operates as a movie director blocking a complex scene.
That's a really great way to look at it.
The building provides the script and the set design, but you don't actually know the pacing of the film until you choreograph the bodies moving through it. You need to see where the actors cross paths, where they speed up, where they naturally come to a halt.
Because time is the variable that proves whether a building actually functions. Architecture is experienced sequentially.
Right, you don't take it all in at once.
No, occupants approach thresholds, they filter through entryways, they compress into corridors, and they disperse into plazas.
So by mapping movement through gestural blurring or directional arrows, the architect is mapping the tempo of the space.
Exactly. The directional flow of sketched bodies reveals the functional logic, or the functional failure of the design.
For example,
Well, if you draw a narrow alleyway and fill it with closely spaced, minimal figures all flowing in one direction, you instantly communicate a psychological sense of compression and urgency.
whereas a drawing of a public marketplace would require a completely different kinetic mapping.
Totally different.
You would draw intersecting paths, clustered bodies pausing at stalls, eddies of slower movement overlapping with fast transit lanes.
And the text details how different architectural drawing types are utilized to test these specific aspects of movement.
Oh yeah, let's go through those, like the plan drawing.
Right, a plan drawing, which looks down on the building from above, is the ultimate tool for evaluating occupancy density and horizontal circulation.
It's like looking at an ant farm from the top.
Exactly. It allows the designer to mathematically identify where bottlenecks will form and where crowd flow might choke.
But then a section drawing, cutting vertically through the building, that tests a completely different kind of movement.
Yes. It reveals how the human body experiences vertical scale, the physical exertion of stair movement, and the psychological pressure of a dropping ceiling height.
And then there's the elevation and perspective drawings.
Right, an elevation shows the facade scale in relation to the public realm, while a perspective drawing captures the depth and atmosphere of the approach.
So drawing movement is fundamentally a stress test for the architecture.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
A grand corporate lobby might look stunningly elegant when drafted as an empty, pristine volume. But when the architect layers in the realistic transit paths of 300 employees arriving at 8:45 a.m.,
Oh, then it's a completely different story.
right, that drawing might suddenly reveal that the beautiful lobby is actually going to be a congested, infuriating nightmare to navigate.
Because the drawing forces the designer to confront the temporal reality of the space. It prevents them from falling in love with the geometry that cannot support the kinetic demands of its occupants.
But bodies moving through a space eventually need to stop, work, and interact. The building's walls and floors can't adapt to every specific resting position or task.
No, they can't.
Which brings us to a secondary, more intimate layer of design that catches those bodies. The text calls this the scale bridge.
Ah, yes. The hidden power of furniture.
Furniture, it's so much more than just picking out a nice couch.
It really is. Furniture is frequently underestimated in architectural representation, often treated as mere interior decoration.
An afterthought.
Exactly. But the text frames furniture as the critical anchor that scales the massive volume of a building down to the intimate dimensions of the human body.
Because furniture clarifies the program, which is architecture speak for the specific function of the room.
Yes, the program. If you look at a floor plan featuring 4 walls and a door, it is functionally ambiguous.
It could be anything. An art studio, a primary school classroom, a corporate cafeteria. The architecture alone doesn't declare its intent.
But the second the architect drops a drafting table into that plan, or a cluster of low couches, the purpose of the void becomes instantly legible.
Beyond just declaring the purpose, the density and arrangement of the furniture dictate the entire atmosphere of the space.
They absolutely do. Consider an open plan office layout. If the architect draws a rigid, tightly packed grid of identical desks, the drawing broadcasts productivity, high density, and perhaps a stark austerity.
Now take those exact same 4 walls and redraw the interior with scattered lounge chairs, a few low coffee tables, and irregular clusters of soft seating.
The architecture is identical, but the spatial reading is completely transformed.
Right. It now communicates informality, flexibility, and comfort. The furniture participates directly in the emotional and psychological reading of the environment.
Because it tells the occupant how to behave. A monolithic kitchen island signals a standing, active work zone. raked auditorium seating commands, collective forward-facing focus.
It's basically a behavioral script.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the text actually highlights several common errors students make when learning to render occupied space, such as improperly scaling the figures or adding people arbitrarily.
Right, just throwing people in to make it look busy.
Yeah. But the most revealing mistake is placing furniture without calculating the necessary circulation space for actual humans to walk around it.
I loved that detail. It really highlights how drawing furniture is another built-in stress test.
Oh, absolutely.
It's one thing to make a living room layout look visually balanced from a bird's eye view. It's another entirely to realize you haven't left enough physical clearance for someone to pull out their dining chair without hitting the wall.
Or for two people to pass each other in the kitchen.
Right, which is why the source material frames the act of drawing occupied space as an evaluative tool.
It's a form of deeply practical design thinking. The architect is actively testing the room against the realities of human friction.
Can multiple users coexist comfortably here? Do the thresholds invite entry, or do the furniture placements create unconscious barriers?
Exactly. If you cannot realistically draft people navigating around the couches and tables you have placed, the architecture has failed its primary obligation to its users.
Wow, okay, so we have populated the space with proportional keys, mapped the kinetic tempo of the crowd, and anchored the room with furniture.
We've built a whole world.
We have, but if we are constantly stress testing the architecture against the human body, the text forces us to confront a rather massive variable.
A very important one.
Whose bodies are we actually drawing? This shifts the conversation from a generic idea of human scale to the engineering reality of real-world diversity.
This is a profound shift in contemporary architectural thinking.
How so?
Well, historically, the discipline relied heavily on a singular, neutralized body as the ultimate proportional key.
Like a standardized person.
Right. In the mid-20th century, you had systems like Le Corbusier's modular.
Modular, right.
Yeah, which explicitly based the mathematical proportions of architecture on the idealized figure of a 6-foot-tall, able-bodied adult male.
Wow. And that became the default setting for the built environment.
It did. And operating on that default assumption fundamentally flaws the geometry of a building.
Because we aren't all 6-foot-tall men.
Obviously. The reality is that spatial experience is radically subjective, dictated entirely by a person's physical ability, age, body size, and mobility.
Okay, so give me an example of how that plays out in design.
Well, think about a handrail placed at 36 inches. That is a helpful guide for an average height adult. But for a toddler, it is a physical barrier obstructing their view.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or the slope of a ramp. It dictates the sheer physical exertion required by a wheelchair user to access a public plaza.
So what does this all mean for the person holding the pen, drafting the actual blueprint?
The text makes it clear that representing diverse bodies, children, elderly, wheelchair users, people pushing strollers, isn't just a symbolic gesture of inclusion.
It's not just to make the rendering look diverse.
No, it is a strict engineering requirement.
Because if an architect exclusively populates their drawings with able-bodied, average-height adults, they are literally engineering a physical world where anyone outside that narrow biometric window is treated as an afterthought.
Their comfort, their line of sight, their dignity, they're all entirely omitted from the spatial geometry.
That's incredibly powerful. So by intentionally drawing a diverse range of physical proportions and mobilities, the designer is forcing the architecture to defend itself against a much wider array of human realities.
Exactly. Can a child reach this counter? Does this doorway provide enough clearance for a mobility device to pivot?
The text refers to this process of drawing as a site of social imagination.
I love that term. It's the practice of projecting oneself into the varied lived experiences of future occupants.
Putting yourself in their shoes.
Right. The source describes architecture as a stage for life. Not in the sense of theatrical artificiality, but acknowledging that the physical environment sets the hard boundaries for how life can unfold.
It dictates the limits of what is possible, what is comfortable, and what is exhausting in that specific space.
And if the architect possesses the authority to set those conditions, they carry the responsibility to ensure those conditions allow all forms of life to unfold with dignity and clarity.
Including diverse figures in the drafting phase ensures the stage is built for the entire cast, not just the leading man.
Beautifully said. It completely reframes the definition of architecture. Architecture doesn't end at the wall, the window pane, or the structural column.
Those are merely the containers.
Right. The actual architecture, the spatial reality, only comes alive in the physical encounter between the built environment and the occupant.
Translating empty geometry into inhabited, humane reality requires a profound degree of empathy, drafted line by line into the blueprint.
The drawing process demands that we view buildings not as isolated sculptural objects to be admired from a distance, but as habitats.
Habitats to be entered, navigated, leaned against, and shared by a complex variety of human bodies. So for you listening, next time you walk into a brilliantly flowing museum, where you intuitively know exactly where to pause and where to move,
Or conversely, the next time you find yourself aggressively squeezing past a table in a painfully cramped coffee shop,
you will know exactly what the architect did or didn't bother to test in their drawings. The space either anticipated your presence, or it treated your body as a spatial inconvenience.
we have spent this entire deep dive exploring how architects use the human body to define physical space, movement, and boundaries.
Right.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture of how we live right now, there is a completely new variable disrupting everything we just discussed.
Oh, what's that?
The glowing rectangle of the smartphone.
Oh, wow. Of course.
Look at the room you are in right now. We talked about how the placement of furniture and the height of the ceiling physically choreograph your posture and movement. But think about how digital technology has completely overwritten the physical scale of your environment.
That is wild to think about.
Right? An architect can design a majestic vaulted reading room intended to inspire awe and upward focus. But if every occupant is hunched over a 4-inch screen, the physical architecture has been neutralized.
The proportional key is no longer the body against the room.
Exactly. It is the eye against the screen.
Wow.
Are we still actually occupying the physical architecture, or has our spatial reality already migrated into a digital room that the architect has absolutely no control over?